Hello and welcome to Stampscaping 101. This is a card that I did in a live broadcast, and I really love this kind of format of this mirror card, as I call them. So I thought I would do a time-lapse version, because I know the full-length version of this is quite long, and I don't know, a lot of you don't have time to sit through something like that. Although you could scroll through and check it out. And one of the interesting things about the live broadcast is that you can also see the comments and whatever that are going on throughout the entire process, and that's always kind of fun to see. But if you're just kind of interested in getting the gist of how to do one of these cards, we can sit through this time lapse here together, and I can kind of explain things. Okay, so this is a half-page piece of iridescent paper. The brand is, I don't know if it's the brand, but the line is Stardream, and this is the lapis lazuli. It's kind of a darker blue tone. Okay, so this lapis lazuli, or just Stardream types of papers in general, they're fairly sealed off in terms of their porous, I don't know, kind of nature, okay? So some types of pigment inks will not dry on this type of paper. Not all the Stardream papers are created equally. Some are more sealed than others, specifically the metallics. This one's more of the iridescent type. But still, something like an oil-based pigment ink may or may not dry on here. Okay, now there's different characteristics for the different brands of pigment inks, and maybe it depends on where you live too. If you're living somewhere very arid, maybe it has a possibility of drying. I don't know. But what I'm using is Brilliance inks, okay? Brilliance inks are a water-based pigment ink that are designed to dry. Well, what they designed them to dry on is glossy cardstock back in the day when they were created, okay? But that same characteristic and ability of drying on glossy cardstock really applies to a lot of different surfaces that you'll see in this video, right down to maybe the most non-porous surface that you'll ever stamp on with the silver foil that I end up using. Okay, so I'm adding these clouds down, and I used a paper towel as a template, a torn paper towel, and it gives a really harsh edge. So what I do is I really kind of I don't know, kind of taper that off with some lighter applications of pigment ink, and I apply it below that area of the mask, but I also apply it over the top of it so that the cloud looks a little bit more kind of airy and light, okay? And I use different kind of application motions. Sometimes I'm kind of swirling the cotton ball around, and sometimes I'm kind of dragging it in a kind of a flicking motion. Find out kind of the motion that works best for you, and don't just stick with one. Go for different textures requiring different types of application methods, okay? Keep it nice and free in terms of your motion of your hand, and it'll give you kind of a more graceful application of any type of media. That goes for anything, not just pigment inks on, iridescent cardstock. Okay, there's my moon right there, just a easy application of the moon. I have that deer sitting there because I'm going to stamp that deer in there, so I'm just kind of putting it down there for positioning purposes. Okay, and after I get that moon in there, I'm putting in some additional applications of white. When this pigment ink starts to dry, it moves more towards transparency. It doesn't become transparent, but it moves in that direction, so it becomes darker looking. So you can apply another layer of pigment ink to get a thicker application and thus more opaque, okay? And sometimes, I just like to kind of alter things. I like to vary things, okay? So I'm not going for a perfect application of this ink, but that's the key to it. Kind of keep it a little bit more irregular, okay? Don't be so careful with it, and I think it'll look more natural, okay? So put it on in a free-flowing type of application that's very scary to some people that want it exact. And there you can see what it'll look like. I'm kind of gauging what it'll look like with my mirror card formatting that I'll be adding in here. So it's like a chef kind of tasting their food, along the process. When you're doing something that's involving two components that are related to each other, this, picture and reflection, you want to kind of take a look at it and see what it's going to look like. Now, I added a little bit more white to that moon just because I thought it needed to stand out a little bit more in terms of the contrast in that mirrored section, okay? And we're not working with a perfect mirrored surface, but that's about as kind of chrome-like a silver cardstock as I could find, something as close to, like a mirrored surface as I could find, okay? It won't quite show up if you're using more of like a brushed aluminum or something like that. You can go for a different type of look, but I don't think it'll look so mirrored. So that's the piece that I'm using right there. And it's really inexpensive. It's a pack of 60 for, I don't know, at the time that I bought it, it was $17. I've seen mirrored types of surfaces going for $1 each, and I found this to be really good in terms of my, the purposes that I bought it for. Okay, so I added that white underneath that bluff right there, that rocky ledge, and if I didn't add that white down there, okay, I call it blocking out, okay, if that black ink is just sitting against that dark blue surface, there's not going to be as much contrast, so you put some of that white going all the way to the bottom. Anywhere where you're going to stamp out imagery in a scene, I recommend some white, and that's where the Brilliance ink comes in. You can do that even on the foil, which you'll see in a bit. Okay, so I'm going to be adding in some additional trees here, again with the black Brilliance pigment ink, okay? And let's see, I'm kind of positioning right here. I'm trying to decide where this is going to go. And I should have stood up here, as you'll see. I have that mask over the rock there, and it kind of left a little hole, so I just stamp another tree right in there. Here I load up a little bit more ink here and give it a little bit of a stronger impression. And there you go right there. Kind of undermask a little bit too, so that you don't get this big gap in between that ledge or the rock, whatever you're using, and those trees, okay? It's not perfect, but I am going to shade in that area, so don't worry too much about it. Okay, now I'm positioning the deer because I want to put some additional trees on the left-hand side of this composition, so I'm going to position the deer first to see where it's going to go. I'm gauging what it's going to look like right there. Look at those trees on the right-hand side. Aren't those fun? Kind of reflecting down in that water, or what will represent kind of a lake or whatnot. Here we go with the trees. Okay, masking off. I've stood up to get this impression. Any type of large stamps with a lot of surface area, go ahead and stand up to get adequate pressure. Don't completely squash the stamp or something like that, but get adequate pressure and you'll be better off. I'm still getting used to seeing my mug there, in that picture-in-picture. I've always kind of, cringed at the thought of doing that, but I don't know. People like seeing you on people in videos, so I thought, oh, let's just start doing that. Okay, but there we go with the different reflections down there. Doesn't that make for, kind of a three-dimensional and dramatic look to the piece? I think the scene looks, pretty decent as is if we were just talking, the lapis lazuli. But you add that mirror down there, and I don't know, I just think it's greater than the sum of its parts, It's not just like double the kind of appearance, but I don't know, just a little bit more. In these mirror cards, one of my first ones that I did in quite some time on another live stream, I added more to it. I'm adding a little bit of a shadow underneath that deer right there, kind of being cast by the moon. But see how I've kind of anchored down that rock on both sides with some additional Brilliance ink. I'm going to frame the scene off a little bit too with this black ink in the upper left and right hand corner. I'm showing, just kind of demonstrating that I'm tapering it from kind of a darker application in the corner to a lighter one when this kind of sweeping application motion. Okay. And that way we go from kind of dark to light, from the outside edge to the inside like that. And I think this just kind of frames the scene off a little bit more. You don't have to do that. I think it looked okay as is, but I think this looks a little bit more complete. It kind of contains the composition a little bit like that. So I'm putting this darker edge. It's a vignette, basically, you know, kind of putting those darker perimeters like that. And I think it just gives it a little bit more of a complete look. Okay, so adding some more in there. I'm kind of giving it, you know, kind of a streaky look as well. See that kind of streak in the sky? I think that looks good in that sky area. I'm not going for a perfectly smooth application and completely uniform. I like it streaky, and I think that looks more natural like that. Okay. Gauging again what it's going to look like, and plus I wanted to show the viewers that were watching this scene being made live, you know, kind of what we're going after and what it's going to look like. Alright, so time to work on this silver foil here. My fingers are getting a little bit kind of inky and smudgy, but I'm kind of figuring out where to position these rocks, okay? And I didn't exactly know what I was going to do until I got here. I pulled out some stamps beforehand. But sometimes you have to kind of see what the scene above, you know, is going to look like before you kind of go in with your bottom composition down here. I mean, I have a decent idea, but really until you do it, you know, it's really kind of hard to tell. Okay, so what I'm doing right here is that thing that I call blocking out. If I just stamp those rocks onto this silver foil, you're not going to be able to see it very well, because you can see most of that silver foil when it's reflecting what's in it. It's kind of dark, right? So I need to block it out with some white, I guess kind of opacity here, okay? And just kind of gauging if I've used enough of that. Okay, now you have to heat set this, I think. It might be a little bit too wet, okay? Sometimes if you stamp wet into wet, you end up removing the white rather than transferring the black, if you know what I mean. So you just heat set it, and it gives it kind of a nice surface by which to stamp your, again, Brilliance inks down. You might be able to use a StazOn for this, I don't know. Could work. The Brilliance inks are pigment inks, so they're a little bit thicker, so I tend to go with the Brilliance inks here. Those will not stick on there permanently, okay? So all I'll do is I will spray seal this afterwards, okay? After I get everything stamped out. I don't do it in this video because, you know, you have to go outside to do that. And, you know, this is a live broadcast. I'm not going to, you know, say, okay, I'll be back in 5 minutes. You know, a dead air time or something like that. So I just do this whole thing, you know, without spray sealing. Okay, now these impressions are wet, okay? So what we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to heat set them, and then I'll take off that residual excess white, okay? Now I decided, okay, I have a little gap down in there. Let's put those rocks and leaves impression just to kind of get rid of some redundancy. Every time you heat up foil too, or thick cardstock, it kind of starts to curl on you a little bit, so I just counterbend it every time I heat set. Okay, this is the rocks and leaves. By the way, those are the Brookside boulders that were stamped in there just 3 times. Hopefully it doesn't look like the same stamp just used over and over again. I've used different portions of it. You know, I don't want it to, you know, be so redundant or something like that. There we go with the heat setting. I don't have to heat set 100%, but if it heat sets about 60% or so, then I can work with this, and it's no problem. So I'm just showing my previous foil card there. Okay, so see that excess white not a problem at all. All I do is I take a paper towel here. It's not even a wet paper towel or anything. It's a dry paper towel. And I just go in here and I just wipe it right off. You know, that's the beauty of this ink. It dries on there, but it doesn't, you know, it doesn't prevent you from going in and removing it. So you might see it as a weakness in terms of it not sticking to the surface absolutely and permanently. But look at this. You can edit it. I didn't have to be so perfect with that white application of ink because I know I can remove it, okay? So, you know, what might be seen as a weakness, you just utilize it as a strength. And there you go. You can edit. If I didn't like this whole thing, I can wipe the whole thing out. You know, black ink as well as white ink, okay? But all we need to do is we just need to spray seal it with like a Krylon or acrylic spray or whatnot. Okay, now all these rocks are a little bit too white right now, so I'm going back in, and just like I did on that top scene on the lapis lazuli at the base of those rocks, I'm adding in this extra tone, and I'm adding in some grayscale. See that right there? Where it kind of rounds off those rocks a little bit more. It almost gave us a little bit of a warm gray look to it. I don't know why. But I'm just showing you where you can kind of go in and tone in these rocks right here. I'm adding in some shadow work at the base of the rocks, but on the top sides of the rocks, I leave it a little bit lighter to reflect this idea of, you know, that moonlight coming from above. So rocks are being top lit. What does that mean in terms of our shading? Well, it just means you bottom shade your objects. So at the base of those rocks, I'm making it darker like that. So again, it looks like the light is coming from above. Okay, I'm having these rocks cast a shadow in here, so I'm adding in some black, kind of vignetting again on the perimeter. Now that's the area where I keep putting my finger in and it keeps wiping off during this entire process. So even after I get this card formatted and glued down, taped down, or glue, I don't know, whatever, tape gun, down on the surface, I'll go in and kind of fine tune with some additional black in that area. Okay, these are some additional rocks in here. You know, we have just some dark rocks like that to, I don't know, add a different type of texture to the open rocks like that. But look at those rocks down there in that water. Now look how three-dimensional that's starting to look, right? And this card's, you know, it's basically done at this point. You know, there's some fine tuning that I do. I do some splatter painting in here to create even more texture. Wasn't planning on that when I started it out, but I thought, that might look pretty good and kind of give it the kind of first snowfall, you know, type of look, or a dusting of snow coming down. Holding that up, it occurred to me, I thought, let's go with a little bit more shading in here. To kind of balance off the scene. I think with that lapis lazuli up top there being a dark paper, it occurred to me that maybe some of this, the white of the Brilliance ink blocking out looks a little bit too light, so I darkened in my rocks a little bit more. So I keep having to wipe that area in there with, you know, some paper towels because it gets real smudgy. Not that it can't, you know, this whole piece can be completely dry, and like I said, you can, you know, wipe off anything if you get some little smudgies down here. Okay, this is a quote stamp right here, and it has some pretty small text, so I had to be a little bit careful about making my impression and inking it up even, because when you get those kind of interiors of your lowercase letters like A's and O's and whatever, E's, you know, you don't want those to fill in. But I love the look of white text on the foil surface, okay? And because it looks like the text is floating to me, and it kind of creates this, I don't know, additional layer of this three-dimensional illusion going on. So it's like the, you know, the lettering floating on the water's surface or something like that sort. Okay. Inking up letter forms like this, you really want to make sure that you get an even application. So I did a test print right there just to kind of get my bearings and whatnot. You'll see I kind of stamped this out a little bit crooked. I could have wiped it out off and then re-stamped it. Okay, I'm kind of getting gauging where I want this text quote to be, by putting in that reflection up there. But holding it down, it came out okay. It's a touch off, you can see it kind of slanting a little bit. I don't know. I tend to slant to the left a little bit. I notice that when I'm taking photographs and things like that too. Good thing there's a digital leveler in there. But see, look at that text in there with over that reflection of those trees in the background. Or not in the background, but above it. Doesn't it look like that text is, just really floating on the surface? So again, it's an extra layer of that three-dimensional appearance to the this formatting here, this mirror card type of look. Okay, so looking at this piece right here, I like my scene just as is, but I thought it would look even better with some additional texture. And when you're doing this splatter painting like this over the top of a scene, what you're doing is you're adding in an entirely new layer of both texture. You're adding in a new layer of light because it's splattering white. There's contrast going on. And it's also dimension when you're putting it over the top like that. See, if it's in the sky, it represents something really far in the distance, right? But if I'm doing it like snowfall, I can put it over the front of my trees and whatnot. And I don't know, I just think it looks really dramatic. And here I'm going to splatter paint this bottom portion too, but you don't want to splatter paint text too much unless it's really bold text, but these lowercase letters, I don't want it to look like I'm dotting a bunch of extra I's or having an extra period or something like that in there. So, be a little bit careful about that. Okay, so I didn't splatter paint that too much. You can see there's just kind of a dusting of, those white dots down here. And you can see that Dr. Martin's bleed proof white is very, very opaque. Okay, now you can't really see too much of that, the reflected little stars or snowfall from above, the scene above down below. But I think it really enhanced that top portion of the scene. I don't know, some people might interpret it as snow, some people might see it as stars, some people might see it as both. To me, it could be either. I don't really care what it looks like, as long as it looks good. Or I don't care what it represents. It could be snow and stars, I don't know. Okay, so let's get this tape down here. And I probably should always do these mirror cards on like a darker cardstock, because one of the things about them is I'm adding this to that pre-folded card like that, and you want to leave a little bit of space in between that top scene and the bottom foil part, okay? And that's because you want to be able to close the card, and if you have it butted up right against each other, it's kind of an awkward fold. This is still a card that's going to be, in theory, mailed out to someone, okay? Now, I'm being a little bit gingerly about my application of this tape in here because that pigment ink is still a little bit dry, and it's also not sticking, of course, to this foil, and it won't until I spray seal it. So here I left a little bit too wide of a gap there. That's too much right there. But you'll see what I do here. My, my impromptu fix is just to fill that area in, okay? So I'm looking at that gap right there, and that it's a little bit too big of a gap. You should probably do more like a 1/16 of an inch. That's like a 1/8 of an inch gap right there. Okay, now I'm applying some more of this black because I'm getting real smudgy and handling the card with my fingers like that. So, okay, now on the perimeter I can also add in, or I can just trim out that excess foil, where I can see that white of the card showing through. But I found that just going into it like this with a Sharpie, permanent marker, kind of reduces the appearance of that, white gap in between. And I thought that worked pretty good. The foil almost looks black itself, so, just darken it in like this, no problem. Because I have that vignette of the black anyway with the pigment ink, so There you go. That's what that looks like right there. I'm just mentioning what you can add on the outside. You can kind of do a little thing, and I was thinking it would be kind of good if I, kind of frame it off with a little bit of silver like that. So I'll do something on the outside, but there it is right there. There's our foil mirrored scene, and you can see that nice reflective quality of that silver paper like that. And I think that looks pretty effective in terms of the illusion of, a three-dimensional deep space, almost like a diorama, I think, there. So, I don't know, I really love that look. And, yeah, I don't know. I think they're really fun. And for me, that degree of, I don't know, three-dimensional kind of illusion um, came out pretty easily. It's just stamping two-dimensionally. I didn't have to do any kind of cutouts or pop-ups or anything like that. And I don't know, it all just comes together like that. Okay, so anyways, I hope you enjoyed this card and this kind of formatting. Like I said, this is from a live stream, and maybe someday, if you haven't checked one out already, check out a live stream. Be sure and subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. A lot of these scenes that I'm doing, these cards that I'm doing, are impromptu. I kind of log on whenever I can to do these broadcasts, and they're kind of spur of the moment. So I don't know if you have your computer or whatever around, or your tablet, or whatever you use to browse the internet, you'll be able to know when I go on, and you can log on and check out the live stream. And this is another live stream from the previous day, but just using color on that top portion, and that one was a quarter page, and this one is a half page right here. Okay, so thanks again, and thanks for watching this time-lapsed version of the creation of this mirror card.